Hey, hey, cats and kittens, it's Doc Haman. I'm here at my house in Townsend. I'm going to tell you a story if you want to listen. As I've said to you before, I'm not able to come into the Lunenburg Library to tell you stories in person, so I'm going to do it here from home. And I realized a little while ago that I had some kind of cool stories to tell about animals that my family has had experience with in the past. So I thought I'd tell you a story about one of those animals today. Actually, two of those animals today. Uh, and this story goes back to when I was a boy and living in New Hampshire with my parents on a little farm there. And we had some cows, a couple of cows, a whole bunch of chickens, and some ducks, and a dog, and a bunch of cats, too. Uh, and we also had a horse whose name was Old Euphemia. We had a buckboard, which is a kind of wooden wagon that has a flat back with some short sides on it, so you can load lots of stuff in the back. And we used to hitch up Old Euphemia to the wagon and drive her down to the Cracker Barrel store on the weekends to get supplies. Now, Euphemia was getting pretty old by the time I was in high school, but every fall, usually somewhere around mid-November, I would drive Euphemia across town to Ernst Kruger's farm. Now, Ernst raised a lot of pigs, and every fall he would kill and butcher the pigs, and I had agreed for a share of the meat that came out of that to go over and help him. And so one day, the year I was an 11th grader in high school, I hitched up Old Euphemia to the buckboard, picked up the reins, and drove her across town to Ernie's place. And Ernie and I put in a full day of working on those hogs. And when 4:30 came around and it was starting to get dark, I realized that I'd better hop in that wagon and get back home. Now, Ernie had been very generous, and he'd put a whole bunch of the meat from those pigs that we'd been cutting up into the back of the wagon. And I started to climb up and set off for home when Ernie said, "Doc, you have a gun with you?" And I said, "Ernie, no, I don't think so. I'm not worried about this. It's a few miles home, but I'm not nervous at all." He said, "Well, there are some dangerous critters out there, so you better get on your way and try to get home as quickly and as safely as you can." Well, I didn't think too much about it, but I got up on the seat and I picked up the reins and I started Euphemia, and we headed back for home. And we went across a couple of open fields, but then we came to a place where the road went down a hill into an area that had a swamp on one side and some woods on the other. And I don't know, the hairs raised up on the back of my neck, and I got this strange feeling, and I got kind of scared. But I clucked to Old Euphemia. I went, and she headed on down that hill towards the swamp. And just as we got down to the place where the trees on the left-hand side came down and the swamp started on the right, I looked over to the side, and there I saw a bear as big as a cow. And he was just standing there. And when I looked at him, he made a noise that was partway between a hoot and a grunt and a cough, sort of like, and boy, if I thought I'd been a little nervous before, I was scared for sure now. Because, of course, that bear had smelled all of the pork, all of that pig meat in the back of my wagon, and he wanted his share. Well, the bear came closer and was gathering himself to leap into the back of the wagon. And as soon as he made his lunge, Old Euphemia took off. And she may have been old, but she was scared enough to go pretty darn fast. So we took off, and that bear was lumbering along right behind us. And I'd glance back over my shoulder, and I could see that it was gaining on us. And it was getting closer, and I realized there was only one thing I could do. So I picked up a piece of meat from behind me, and I threw it over my back. And the bear turned off and chased after that piece of meat. But as soon as he had scoffed it down, He was back on our trail again, and he was catching up fast. So I reached behind me and I grabbed another piece of meat and I threw that back. This time, he caught it in his left paw, just like a center fielder in baseball, and he stuffed it in his mouth and scoffed it down. He hardly even broke stride. Well, I reached behind me and I threw another piece of meat back. This time, he caught it right in his mouth without even stopping, and I knew we were in for trouble. And that's the moment when I decided I had to do something a little more than just drive along and throw the meat back. So I tied the reins off to the side of the seat, and I climbed into the back of the buckboard. And with Euphemia galloping along at full pace, I just knelt down there and I started picking up pieces of meat and throwing them out with both hands. Well, it worked pretty well for a little while. It took the bear a little bit of time to gather up that meat, but pretty soon I had thrown out the last piece, and that bear was getting closer and closer once again. And I couldn't think of anything to do. I guess I just gave up. And I just knelt down there on the back of the buckboard, and I put my head down and put my hands over my head, and I waited. Well, I thought I heard the bear make a kind of funny, and I thought what he had done was jump for the back of the wagon. And I was pretty sure that I was going to be dessert after all of that meat he'd eaten. But nothing happened. I didn't feel any teeth sticking into my flesh. I didn't feel the weight of the bear on top of me. And I wondered what could have happened. Could he have misjudged? A second later, I heard a thud and a kind of squeal, and then a whole lot of chomping and smacking and crunching. I still was too scared to look up. The wagon had stopped, and there I was, still kneeling down in the back, with a bear, a hungry bear, right near me. But again, I was young. I was just too scared to do anything else. And I waited, and I waited. And finally, the wagon gave a little lurch, and it started forward. And then it started moving a little faster, and it went faster and faster. And finally, I thought, what's happening here? I don't know what this is. What can I do? And I got enough courage to sit up and turn around and look. And then I gave a little laugh because I realized what had happened. When that bear had gathered himself to jump up onto the back of the buckboard and eat me, he had miscalculated, and he had jumped a little bit too far, and he'd sailed right over the buckboard onto the back of Euphemia, and he had eaten her up. But he had also eaten his way right into the harness, and now, as the wagon was rolling along clippity-clop faster than it had been even before, it was the bear who was pulling me along. Well, I climbed back up into the seat, and I picked up the reins, and I gave him a little directions, I snapped the reins at him, and I clucked at him, and we had about 2 miles to go before we got back to our house. But by the time we pulled in the driveway, he was as tame as a kitten and as well behaved as a girl at her first formal dance. And in fact, we actually kept that bear. We named him Orsino, after a character in a Shakespeare play. And for many years thereafter, he was the one that we would hook up and drive down to the Cracker Barrel store for our supplies. And he got to be very, very popular in town. All the kids would bring him an apple or a carrot or a lump of sugar. And my mom and dad kept him even after I went off to college. And in fact, it was only after old Orsino died that they got their first car.